And I'm getting off camera, just 1 second, and I'm starting the webinar.
Friends, colleagues, fellow human rights defenders, I'm delighted to welcome you to this online event organised by the International Service for Human Rights and HRCnet to welcome Ambassador Federico Villegas, the incoming President of the Human Rights Council, and to thank and to farewell former President Ambassador Nazhat Shameem Khan. We're also joined on the panel today by HRCnet members Camilla Mayer of CELS in Argentina and Gustavo Hoops of Connectus in Brazil. We will have simultaneous interpretation for this event in English, French and Spanish. You can of course choose the language using the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen. I'd also like to remind panelists to please stay on the channel of the language that you're speaking in. We also have English captioning in Zoom, which you can activate using the closed captions button at the bottom of your screen. And the event is being live streamed on ISHR's YouTube channel in English, French and Spanish, and captions in French and Spanish are available on the YouTube stream. If you have any questions during the event for the current and former Human Rights Council presidents, then please use the Q&A function. I will select a range of audience questions, as well as questions that have been submitted via Twitter, to pose to our keynote speakers in the latter part of the event. My name is Phil Lynch. I'm the Director of the International Service for Human Rights, and I'm delighted to be hosting this event together with HRCnet. At its best, the UN Human Rights Council can be an important mechanism contributing to positive change at the national level. For many rights holders, victims and activists, the Council provides the last, or indeed the only opportunity to expose violations, seek accountability, or to garner international support for their vital work for freedom, dignity, justice, and equality. Over the last year, civil society actors, as well as progressive states, have collaborated at the Council to address systemic racism, to recognise the right to a healthy environment, to promote a rights-based response to climate change, and to address grave and deteriorating human rights situations through special sessions and urgent debates in states including Myanmar, Sudan, Ethiopia, Israel in the OPT, and Afghanistan. For these achievements to continue, we need a council that is credible, effective, accessible, and responsive, particularly for rights holders and defenders. And the President and Bureau, of course, have a vital role to play in this regard. Since 2019, civil society organisations like ISHR and other HRCnet members have expressed concern regarding the Council's adoption of efficiency measures to address the UN's financial shortfalls and the COVID-19 pandemic. These measures have disproportionately restricted civil society participation. Almost 40 NGOs coming from all regions have reiterated these concerns in a recent joint letter to the Presidency and Bureau sent on the 25th of January, stressing that the renewed efficiency measures for 2022 should be evaluated primarily in terms of the Council's accessibility and effectiveness, not merely its efficiency. As observers and critical stakeholders of the Council, these NGOs call on states and the Bureau to take and to support 5 key steps. The first is to reinstate general debates in all June sessions. The second is to remove the de facto cap on video participation during general debates. The third is to maintain the possibility to engage remotely with the Council, even after easing COVID-related measures. This has been a vital innovation contributing to the ability of national level human rights defenders to access the Council. The fourth is to organise broad consultations with civil society before taking decisions, including budgetary decisions that may impact on civil society participation and access. And the fifth call is to establish a civil society focal point within the Bureau to facilitate civil society engagement throughout the year, particularly with regard to issues affecting civil society participation, whether that's evaluation of the efficiency measures or ongoing discussions regarding the status of the Council. For the Council to be effective, it must be accessible to rights holders and victims. Those who defend human rights must be able to participate freely, substantively, and safely. They should not be subject to intimidation, nor suffer reprisals for collaborating with the UN. We urge the Presidency, the Bureau, and states to raise concerns and to follow up on specific cases of reprisals, and we demand that governments provide an update on any investigation or action taken towards accountability in cases of intimidation or reprisals. To take advantage of this online setting and to bring a diversity of voices to this event, we've put together a short video to highlight civil society's expectations for the Human Rights Council and the Presidency in 2022. The video is a compilation of short messages from civil society from all regions around the globe.
We appreciate the work of the Ambassador Khan in the presidency of the HRC, and we want to welcome Ambassador Villegas and wish him best of luck. Civil society movements and activists, especially those of us who are in Geneva, we have seen several barriers fall. In 2022, while the world goes through an unprecedented crisis caused by COVID-19, we hope that the Human Rights Council responds to reality and everyday implementation.
And human rights defenders and their organizations.
The Human Rights Council must model strong protection itself to continue to show leadership on civil society spaces within the UN and around the world.
Use the presidency to address the barriers that stop our colleagues from engaging with the UN.
Barriers include laws that delegitimize or criminalize the foreign funding or activities of civil society.
The use of anti-extremist and anti-terrorist legislation to target human rights defenders and their organizations.
Travel bans that limit the ability of human rights defenders to cooperate with the United Nations and regional human rights bodies.
The unwillingness of some states to invite special procedures on country visits and meet with local civil society.
To strengthen their work on accountability on human rights violations, promote the importance of a human rights-based strategy for countering terrorism while addressing all human rights violations committed in the name of countering terrorism.
To renew the mandate of the independent expert on sexual orientation and gender identity. And to ensure that lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, and intersex people are heard and protected through this and all other human rights mechanisms.
Un compromiso firme con la eliminación de todas las formas de discriminación racial que tenga en cuenta la voz de las personas racializadas, las personas LGBTI+, así como las causas estructurales e históricas en las que subyace el racismo. Es fundamental que este año la voz de las personas defensoras sea escuchada por
Right defenders is heard by all, without fear of reprisals.
Black migrants throughout the Americas, with special attention to Black trans people and Black women and girls.
To meaningfully and materially address global anti-Blackness as it informs state-sanctioned violence of police terrorism, surveillance, unemployment, underemployment, and state abandonment, divestment, and the blockage of resources and access for Afro-descendant people and communities.
Deberían enfocarse en no dejar a las mujeres afrodescendientes atrás en las distintas regiones.
And the woman behind. In the end of the discrimination and racism in all its forms to be considered in all. Diversity, ethnically, gender, and classes. For real equity and equality.
Members of the Human Rights Council should model respect for the rights of the religious minorities, to lead not only through their statements at the HRC, but also through demonstrating how their own religious minorities can be empowered, strengthened, how their own minorities can flourish, can enjoy their citizenship, can enjoy their rights and dignity.
We hope that the Human Rights Council will give greater attention to ongoing, grave, and increasing hate speech on social media directed towards faith communities in order to ensure freedom of religion or belief.
As President of the Council, we hope that you will look to civil society as partners and that with us you focus on maximising effectiveness rather than simply so-called efficiency to ensure the overall goal is always to strengthen the Council's positive impact on the protection of human rights around the world. This includes meaningful consultation with civil society as you seek solutions to key challenges and ensuring diverse and active civil society participation beyond the Geneva bubble in informal as well as formal negotiations and discussions.
In 2022, we expect the Council to normalise consulting civil society and to treat civil society as an equal stakeholder.
We will work with you to reduce these barriers and ensure civil society space is strengthened and protected for everyone's benefit. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank our civil society colleagues for sharing those messages, aspirations and expectations. And now it's my pleasure to hand to the former president of the Human Rights Council, Ambassador Khan, to deliver some opening remarks. Ambassador.
Thank you so much, Phil, and thank you to ISHR for organizing this important event. I recall attending similar events in the past, and particularly in the year that I served as vice president under the presidency of Ambassador Kolisek. So I know what an important dialogue this is, and what an important opportunity it is for states and civil society to exchange views with the presidency about how they see the future of the Council. So thank you for this opportunity. And can I also acknowledge the presence of His Excellency, the President of the Human Rights Council. It's a pleasure to share the screen with him, and I look forward to this discussion with him as well. So I can say that the year started with the biggest challenge of all in 2021, and that was maintaining the sessions of the Human Rights Council during a pandemic, and one which resulted in differential consequences as far as numbers in the room were concerned. And I think at the outset, one of the biggest challenges was to work out how to vote virtually in the first session of the year last year, and the adoption of extraordinary modalities to ensure that the Council continued to sit in an effective way so that the substantive work was unhindered. And I'm happy to say that despite the coronavirus, we had a complete year. We had the standard 3 regular sessions of the Council. We had all 3 UPR sessions. And of course, as you know, we had 5 special sessions, and this was an unprecedented number of special sessions. So it was quite a year last year. And that, of course, in addition to the adoption of a completely new modality for virtual voting. And that really was achieved because of a strong collaboration between the Secretariat of the HRC here in Geneva and the UNHQ Secretariat and the experts there on virtual modalities, that we were able to get a result where we got the consensus of states. Of course, many people started off that particular journey by saying that they did not want to have virtual voting, that this was totally unacceptable. But I think that pragmatically, many countries wanted their resolutions, the resolutions that they thought were important in the context of the Council, to be adopted. And that was an important reason why eventually the virtual modalities were adopted by the Council by consensus. I have to say that we all had our share of frustrations with the technology. And I think you know what they are. You were following all the sessions. You know that occasionally we could not be linked to the live web TV. Occasionally we lost a connection with a particular speaker. Occasionally people forgot to unmute themselves. There was a whole host of challenges in relation to the technology, but I think we overcame them. And an important achievement was when we were able to have all the UN languages on a Zoom platform, which of course originally we did not have UNHQ approval for, but we were successfully able to use it throughout most of last year. And I think that was a turning point because many delegations felt that it was important that they could speak in the languages of their countries, of their cultures. And I think this is actually one of the most important strengths of a multilateral platform, for people to be able to choose the language that they speak in. And so that was a very, very important challenge for us. And I'm very glad that we were able to adopt the Zoom platform modalities with all 6 UN languages. And that was, I think, a turning point for the technology. Another result of the technology, and the technology is a double-edged sword. I, with the former ambassador of Latvia, chaired one of the streams of the efficiency measures under the presidency of the ambassador of Slovenia in 2018. And the stream that I co-facilitated with him was on the use of technology. And the feedback we got then, and that was pre-COVID, the feedback we got back then was that we would be more efficient with a better use of technology, we would be more inclusive, but we must not disregard the possibility that some people would be left behind, particularly in the light of the digital divide. What we did find this last year was an unprecedented level of participation and inclusivity from those delegations, state delegations, which come from small island developing states, for instance, who were able to effectively use remote communication and were able to participate in meetings without any resource implications. I think that there was an unprecedented level of participation at the high level segment, in the UPR, and in many of the debates. So that was a very positive effect. And in relation to civil society, as Phil has already said, we had voices from the ground at national level, the voices we hadn't heard before. And that was a very important, I think, development and an important part of the use of virtual technology. But as I've said, it's a double-edged sword. And so I think that in the use of technology, we did lose something as well. For instance, virtual negotiations, I think, can never be as effective as negotiations in person. And I was told over and over again by civil society representatives that they could not get into the virtual rooms. Certainly they could not get in with the same ease as they could when they were able to attend in person. Because, of course, entering the virtual rooms meant getting the link from the sponsors of particular resolutions. So I think that was a downside of the use of technology. And another, of course, is the number of issues that have been raised by Phil, not just in the use of technology, but also in relation to the efficiency measures. So I think we do need to guard against the shrinking of civil society space. I think that as a result of coronavirus, as a result of the different modalities that we have experimented with, I think that civil society has lost the space that they enjoyed previously. So I think it's an important discussion, and I'm glad that we're having this today. I recall that I was invited by ISHR to launch their new practitioner's guide. It was called A Seat at the Table. And I said then, and I will continue to say, that the Council functions the most effectively when voices of human rights defenders receive the attention they deserve. I think your voices represent one of the greatest strengths of the Human Rights Council. And so therefore, this guide that was launched offers real insights into the kinds of messages that will increase support for human rights defenders, as well as how we craft effective human rights narratives, particularly in relation to the role of human rights defenders. So may I say this, that the lessons learned from last year, one, resilience. It was very important that we maintained the strength of the Council, that we stood firm, and that we resisted any suggestion that we should not sit, or that we should sit in reduced hours, or that we should try and in some way cut out the voices of the people who are so important to the future of the Council. So resilience was important, but I think innovation too was important. And I think with the continuation of the coronavirus and the limitations, unfortunately, that it brings to us, I think we must continue to be innovative in the way that we hear everyone's voices. I'd like to thank you, ISHR, and all civil society representatives for your efforts, for your leadership last year. I think that the Council would not have been successful in the way it was without you, your support. I enjoyed my consultations with you, and I think it was very important that we had some very robust discussions about civil society space and also reprisals. And I'm sure we are going to get feedback from the floor on the effectiveness of the method of dealing with reprisals that previous presidencies and I followed. So I will perhaps leave that issue for the questions and the issue on the floor. But I'd like to finish now by thanking you again for organizing this important event. I'd like to thank everyone for your support to me as the president of the council last year, and again wish both ISHR and the 2022 president, His Excellency, for the work that needs to be done this year. Thank you, and over to you, Phil.
Well, thanks very much to you, Ambassador Khan, for your stewardship during a very challenging, but nevertheless, as you've said, very substantive and important year for the Council and for human rights. That not only the busiest year with extended ordinary sessions and 5 special sessions, but some really seismic developments with the establishment of a global commission of inquiry on systemic racism, the recognition of the right to a healthy environment, the establishment of a commission of inquiry looking at the underlying root causes of conflict and violence against Palestinians in Israel and Palestine. So it was a very significant year. Ambassador, or rather President Villegas, it's my pleasure to now invite you to take the floor and offer some reflections or ambitions and expectations for the year ahead.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you very much for this organizing this event. You know, the International Service for Human Rights, it's a very important organization. It's one of the big stakeholders of the Human Rights Council here in Geneva. And I'm very glad for the opportunity here from the Office of the Presidency to talk to you and share some of my thoughts for this year. Of course, I have to acknowledge my great friend and great ambassador and an outstanding president we had last year, Ambassador Khan. And I think the word resilience is not only the best word to define her professionally, but also the most important thing that I will acknowledge from Ambassador Khan's chair is that she was able to make the whole council be resilient, not only her as a chair. She created an atmosphere that collectively we worked as a council with the secretariat, and we all decided at one point to be resilient and not to stop working like many other organizations in Geneva did, which was the easiest way, just postpone things. And we approved over 175 resolutions last year. So, I mean, my whole admiration for Ambassador Khan and her team. And of course, I'm very glad I have 4 very good vice presidents, the representatives of Armenia, Germany, Libya, and Uzbekistan. And we're already having a lot of work. As you see, if you look at the minutes of the Bureau, we had 7 meetings of the Bureau in 1 month. The session hasn't started yet. For the priorities, I will, instead of going in detail, I decided in the speech I gave when I was elected to set out some lines on my priorities and my ideas, but briefly, just to underline them, face the 3 challenges. I think we have 2 substantive and 1 practical. The 2 substantive, of course, is first the polarization, the politicization, and the polarization. So politicization is there. We have to address. It's a political issue, human rights at the national level and international level. But one thing is to address the political aspects of human rights issues. The other thing is a polarization in the council that can paralyze the council, like we had, unfortunately, during the Cold War. So we have to address that challenge and recover a mutual understanding and a platform for dialogue to avoid polarization that paralyzes the council. The second substantive is to start thinking collectively in the historical perspective of what we are doing at the Human Rights Council, because the human rights challenges all over the world on issues and countries are enormous, and a lot needs to be done. What we are doing and what we have done is just the tip of the iceberg of the progressive development of human rights. So collectively, we have to think of all the things ahead that we have, so we can protect and strengthen the council. In practical terms, the challenge, of course, is how can we go back to business? How can we go back to the palais we used to know, with everything that Ambassador Khan just described, that everybody is eager to go back? Interaction, side events, being the serpentine, talking to delegates, and explaining paragraphs and informal consultations. That's one big challenge for this year. I look forward to working closely with civil society in addressing these challenges. And of course, I have four or five actions that I'm intending to move forward in proposing to the council, where civil society will be involved. You can look at them in my speech of December 6th, and you will get an idea of some of the things that I will be proposing in the near future. So I don't take the time of explaining that now. So, and regarding the importance of civil society, of course, it's the heart of the council. There wouldn't be a human rights council if we hadn't had a civil society. And of course, in the case of myself, coming from a country that has created probably the best thing that the Argentine social tissue was ever was created, was the civil society and the human rights movement of Argentina. So well, I know from my experience the importance for the civil society in the council, and we see in the council every time that you are the heart, the blood of the council to let us move forward, to realize what is wrong, what it has to be improved. So the good news, I think, because we always have to see the glass half empty or full, but of course, compared to the tremendous year we had last year, there are some good news that you will see in the organizational meeting on the 14th. NGOs will be back in the Palais, first of all. Second, we have decided, because you have to understand that we still have restrictions of COVID. So far, we still have the restrictions on number of people and distance in the rooms, plus the heritage work in the old building of the Palais. And that, unfortunately, those two conditions at the same time, simultaneously, gives us not as much space as we had in the past. So for this session, probably for the June session, it's going to be another story, but because it seems that the General Assembly Hall, which is very big, will be inaugurated. For this time, the Bureau decided to propose to the Council for the 49th session that NGOs can participate in person in the interactive dialogues, in the panel discussions, and the UPR adoptions in room 19 or by video messages. Second point, because the informal consultations were so important for all of us, we decided that we will have the whole session, the Secretariat and UNO helped us. We will have room 19 for the whole session and another room for informal consultations from the first until the last day. And then in the high level segment, we have 3 additional rooms that will be available in the Palais. So that's a change compared to last year. We are still looking for more rooms, and we will be doing that until the last day. We would like to have another room, like an overflow room with streaming, so that NGOs can be there. But we will see if we can manage that extra room. And finally, I would like to say that the general debate is something that has been very much sought by NGOs and the importance. And there is like a double edge because on one side, to be in person participating in the general debate only, like it is the rule, that with the COVID restrictions will leave many NGOs that cannot travel here to be able not to participate. But the general debate with pre-recorded videos allows NGOs from all over the world to participate. Of course, since we don't have enough space to have a general debate in person exclusively, for the time being, as with the restrictions we have now, we are looking at the and the maximum capacity of participation in general debates will have to remain through pre-recorded video messages only for the time being. And of course, last point in the time in the matter of reprisals, you will always have my presidency during the year with the same consciousness of the importance of reprisals and I will follow the wise path that was set by previous presidents like Ambassador Khan in how to address that important issue. I already had a Zoom with the person in charge with the Secretary General of the United Nations. She's in charge of reprisals at large in the whole UN system. So I'm very much aware of the importance of that. So I look forward to working with you and listening to your questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, President. And before I pose a number of questions to both you, President, and Ambassador Khan, I'm delighted to now invite Camila from CELS in Argentina to offer some reflections from a civil society perspective. And Camila will be immediately followed by Gustavo from Connect Us in Brazil. So Camila, you have the floor.
Hi, everyone. Good morning or afternoon. I will make use of the interpretation and speak in Spanish so that we have a little language diversity. I hope it works, but you can tell me if it's not working for any reason. Entonces, buenos días y buenas tardes, embajadora, embajador. Un gusto verlo, embajador Villegas. Traigo algunos mensajes cortos que reflejan un poco las posiciones del CELS de Argentina sobre el Consejo, como los estamos mirando. Algunas son compartidas por nuestros colegas de esta red y otras organizaciones.
Some organizations have been working in different regions in the world, and the first point, Ambassador, would be the following. Is it working, Diego? I'm going to explain some messages regarding the position of the CELS, which is in Argentina, in Buenos Aires, but we know that some of these subjects are shared by the ISHR, and some of them are here in this meeting, and they're working constantly in the council. The first thing, Ambassador, that Phil mentioned is the participation. We trust that Argentina, with the presidency, has a mission with a very big, an important path, an openness and path of dialogues, and normally we're reflecting about the different points in the council, and we receive with great joy this presidency, and we trust that this will be a very important presidency with key chains to the access of organizations of different agendas, and that this would be an open channel, a channel that will be open throughout the year. And regarding the first point that Phil mentioned, we hope that there will be a focus in the different modalities and the open participation spaces that in the last years, because of financing methods and of course after the pandemic, are being negotiated, and we consider that as users of the system and as voices that are near to the places in which the problems are occurring, we need to help to construct this infrastructure so that we can have a voice and let you know about what's happening, what's working, what's not working, and let's see how we can acquire an effective method. That would be my first message. I would like to focus and underline the importance of the pandemic that showed the difference between the organizations in Geneva that have a permanent representation and the different organizations that are not in Geneva, especially the ones in the global south and the ones that don't have the resources and that need a specific mindset regarding participation, or maybe we need to think about hybrid modalities that would allow these different positions to be set. This would be a first part of my intervention. And there are different subjects that we consider them to be very, very urgent in today's world. And I would like to underline them because I think that these are subjects that are going to be taken care of in March, and the presidency should take care of them. The first thing would be migration regarding the human rights for migrants. We know that the pandemic made borders closed. We had a very particular situation in the whole world, and there were some violations of human rights in borders, but not only in borders, but in other places. And we think that this work regarding migration needs to upgrade its quality and set some mechanisms to respond to this situation that is necessary to be taken care of in the whole world. So that would be my first point. The second point would be regarding the pandemic. The Council approved some resolutions regarding the access to vaccination and the response to pandemic. We know that there is a dialogue going on since 1 year ago, and it's slowly slowly advancing about intellectual property and access to vaccinations and medicines. There are some pronouncings regarding the human rights, the Human Council of Economics, etc. And we think that regarding this situation, that it's slowly advancing regarding all the different systems, it would be interesting to set the different resolutions regarding the subject of the vaccinations and medicines. We understand that the dialogue and the debate will be ongoing now to think about this subject that has a great impact in human rights. Now, I would like to give the floor to Gustavo, who is going to take care of the subjects as well, but I would like to speak about structural racisms. This was part of the subjects that the council could respond to, and we actually thought that this was a very important moment regarding the the readiness of the council, because there was this special session and we think that the organization could set up different tools, and we think that this should happen more often in the council, because this showed that the council is committed with the things that are happening in the streets, and this created, let's say, some channels in the cross-cutting methods that existed, and we think that this is an important subject to take care of. It's something that speaks about the innovation, about the different perspectives of international laws, and we just wanted to underline it. And regarding climate changes, well, this is an important thing to speak about. The mechanisms of the HRC need to profoundly work in this subject. They need to understand what their role is while responding to this crisis that it's affecting all of us through different levels. And therefore, I would like to give the floor to my colleague Gustavo.
I'm Gustavo Rupes, International Advocacy Officer at Conecta Direitos Humanos, an organization based in São Paulo, Brazil, and also a member of HRCnet. Connectus has been working with the UN Human Rights Council since its establishment, and for us is a pleasure and a great opportunity to be here today. I'd like to first thank Ambassador Khan for her term and to welcome Ambassador Villegas as the new president of the council. The year ahead certainly is again a very challenging one for us all. I'd like to second Camila's highlighted priorities of the human rights of migrants, access to vaccines, and the pandemic, and structural racism. In the past months, the Council has taken a very important agenda towards racial justice, systemic racism, and police violence. As an organization from Brazil, a country where we have one of the deadliest police forces in the world, this is an issue that needs to be at the top of the Council's work, and that needs to have all the resources to be fully implemented. This new mechanism also must be able to engage with those who need it the most, people affected by these violations, victims and their family members. For this year, the renewal of the SOGI mandate should also be a shared priority, and we must have a safe and inclusive council for LGBTI defenders to have their voices heard. Ambassador Villegas, it is also very important for the Council this year to address issues related to the global climate crisis and human rights violations connected to it, including environmental and climate racism. For the Council to truly fulfill its mandate, we needed for it to hear civil society and for civil society to be part of the discussions that are undertaken, both in relation to its agenda as well as in relation to its functioning. Civil society in Brazil has been under threat. We have seen many attempts from the government to restrict spaces as well as to silence decent and critical voices. This unfortunately has been a reality in other parts of the world as well. This shows how important it is to fight for a council where we truly have our voices heard and taken into account, and for it to also be a safe space for this to happen. We support the calls to reinstate general debates in all sessions, and we hope this can be something of your support as well. Also, the COVID-19 pandemic has added an extra layer of restrictions and challenges for us all, and must keep open the opportunities to access and engage with the Council remotely. We hope we can keep the work to consult with civil society throughout your presidency in a transparent and inclusive manner. I'd like to wish you all the best in your term this year and hope we can keep working together towards a Human Rights Council more connected to those who need it the most. Thank you, and over to you, Phil.
Well, thank you very much, Gustavo, and also to Camilla. I'd now like to pose some questions to President Villegas and Ambassador Khan. President and Ambassador, these are questions that have been either submitted during the using the Q&A function or alternatively submitted in advance via email or have been shared on social media. So perhaps I'll start with a question to both of you. There's a number of questions that have come through regarding the role of the Council in prevention and your views on how the Council could play a more active and effective role in the prevention of human rights violations, including both through accountability and through the provision of technical assistance. So perhaps I'll ask you in the first instance, Ambassador Khan, to respond to that question.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much for the video as well as the interventions that I just heard. I think there are very important messages. And obviously, as an ambassador of a small island developing state, those discussions on climate change and human rights are particularly, I think, poignant for SIDS. On the prevention agenda, I do believe that one of the most important roles of the Council is the prevention agenda, because the Council can work as an early warning mechanism for human rights violations. I don't think we should wait until everything erupts in an awful conflict situation. There are so many markers which indicate to us that particular situations need scrutiny and care and discussion. One early warning mechanism, of course, is the High Commissioner's oral updates to the Council. She explains particular situations which are of concern to her. And I think that we ignore what she says at our own peril, because often we find that when we do ignore the oral updates, these situations do erupt into something which requires the creation, for instance, of a mechanism, a fact-finding commission of inquiry or something like that. The second early warning mechanism would be the special procedures. And I can't say enough about the importance of special procedures. I think that the system must continue to be strong, to be independent and objective. And I think that the method that we have of appointing special procedures, mandate holders, and of supporting them through the mechanisms of the council with the support of the presidency, most importantly, I think that really helps us to hear the voices of experts who recognize that there are situations that we should pay attention to. And the third early warning mechanism, of course, is the UPR, what they call the crown jewel of the Human Rights Council. And those discussions, the recommendations made to states, the role of civil society in lobbying states to make particular recommendations. I think that's a very important mechanism. And again, civil society itself. Sometimes when we hear your voices and we hear the warning that your voices contain, I think, again, we would ignore those at our own peril. Over to you, Phil.
Thanks, Ambassador. And the same question to you, President, the role of the Council in prevention, both through coordination or promotion of technical assistance and also through its accountability functions.
Thank you very much. And yes, indeed, on both areas, there's an essential role of the Council. First of all, on the accountability, what Ambassador Khan is saying, of course, I support fully. The High Commissioner in several times, she addressed the Council explaining what was wrong in a certain situation, and a couple of months after that, we end up creating a special procedure or appointing the commission. So it's a very important prevention tool, and the special procedures there work the way they are appointed, and especially to understand collectively that we might have as state a discussion when we are discussing to create perhaps a special procedure, and that is valid, the discussion among the states. But collectively, we have to accept in a democratic way that once we appoint a special procedure, it's a collective responsibility to respect and to follow what the council decided on that specific special procedure. So that is, we always have to keep in mind, even those countries that perhaps have not been in favor of creating it, once it's created, it exists, and we have to support it. And as president, we have to not only acknowledge it, support it. And I will add two things to what Ambassador Khan said. First, one prevention tool is what you do and what we have in the social networks. Just to access live the information of what is going on in the council, just to have people engage on a daily basis what is going on in the council, which are the debates, to have the UN public web TV broadcasting the discussions. That is also a prevention tool that perhaps we do not realize because it's not so practical, but in the bigger picture of the world, it's very important. And I think that's we have to keep as public as we can the work of the Human Rights Council. And the other thing is the technical assistance, and the UPR is an essential tool because the prevention also is not for accountability, but also to create the social tissue and the institutions, human rights institutions in the country to prevent any conflict to erupt and to prevent any tension to escalate into a conflict. And at the same time, the prevention through the council comes in the post-conflict. The best way to make sure that a conflict doesn't repeat itself is to create precisely the social tissue institutions in a society that has passed a trauma of a conflict, so that that conflict doesn't erupt. And I don't need to tell you where we are in Europe is the best example in the world, probably, of a continent that witnessed and protagonized the worst massacres and wars and everything. And we are here in Europe with the human rights system institutions that is in the social network and social institutional network of this continent. So that's an obvious example of how we can prevent violations of human rights through the work of the Council. Thank you.
Thank you, President. Perhaps this one to you, Ambassador Khan. There's a question that's come from Cameroonian human rights defenders. Cameroon is, of course, a member of the Human Rights Council, and the Cameroonian defenders have pointed out that there have been persistent allegations of reprisals perpetrated by Cameroonian authorities and officials against human rights defenders. Some of these allegations have been transmitted to the government of Cameroon, which has failed to investigate, to respond substantively, or to ensure any form of accountability. What is the role of the Council, and what is specifically the role of the Presidency, and what's opened the Presidency to address the issue of reprisals when you have non-engagement and non-cooperation with the state concerned?
Thank you very much. I think this is a really important issue. Speaking specifically about Cameroon, I did not receive last year a host of complaints. There was one incident that was brought to my attention, which occurred actually on the floor of the Council. And as to other issues, I think possibly those complaints have been made to the ASG. It's possible, I was not aware of them. But in my opinion, the most important function of the Presidency in relation to alleged reprisals is to ensure that the reprisals stop, because they have a chilling effect, not just on this particular civil society organization, but on everyone who wants to speak and use the Council as a safe space to speak. And if people are afraid, we will not hear the voices of truth from the ground, and thereby crippling the effectiveness of the Council, in my opinion. So I think that if you are to look at the effectiveness of the process that is followed by the Presidency, what has been done by previous presidencies and what I followed was to speak with the country concerned through the ambassador. And this is done after the allegation has already been looked at by the Office of the High Commissioner, to ensure that the NGO concerned exists, for instance. And once that is cleared, then there is a discussion with the ambassador. And that conversation really has to end with a very strong statement by the president that reprisals are unacceptable, that the function of the president is to ensure that they stop, and that we want some sort of undertaking from the country concerned that not only do they accept that this was an unacceptable form of behavior, but also that it will not reoccur. So I think that's the last point, I think, is the most important, because for effective dealing with allegations of reprisals, you do need an undertaking that this is not going to happen again. I did not have many allegations last year. I'm not sure whether there have already been a flood this year, but last year I had very few. And I have to say that in each case, the ambassador concerned engaged and cooperated and gave me the undertaking I wanted to hear, that it would not reoccur. So in terms of whether or not making the allegation public would be a more effective way of dealing with it, I think we should never rule out that possibility. We should never rule out the possibility that if a country does not engage or refuses to accept blame or refuses to accept responsibility, then I think the president could, in his or her own discretion, draw this matter to the attention of the Bureau, thereby, of course, with the publication of the minutes, thereby making it public. But I'm happy to say that last year, this was not necessary. I'm also aware, ISHR and I had discussions on this, on what was the best way of dealing with reprisals. And it's possible in the future that other presidents will have a different view. But my own thoughts on that is that last year, the way in which I dealt with it showed that there was a level of effectiveness in terms of the results that I was looking for. Over to you, Phil.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and for your response and for your engagement on this issue throughout. As you've alluded to, there are indeed other practices, and it was a former president from the Latin America region, the President Dupai from Uruguay, who had the practice of making public allegations of reprisals and publishing both the correspondence regarding the allegation as well as correspondence from the state concerned, bringing a degree of transparency and thereby accountability and denunciation to the act. Turning to you, President, there's a question that's come from the International Bar Association, which is prefaced by the observation that there seems to be an increase in the incidence and severity of attacks against and the criminalisation of lawyers defending human rights defenders. We see examples of this in places like China, in Turkey, in Belarus. So efforts not only to silence human rights defenders themselves, but also those who stand in solidarity with and provide legal representation to human rights defenders. The question from the International Bar Association is, how might this be addressed in the context of the Human Rights Council, and how could the protection of lawyers and the independence of judges and lawyers be better mainstreamed in the work of the Council?
Thank you very much. A very important question, and thank you, the Bar, for that. Indeed, the work of lawyers helping human rights defenders is as important as the human rights defender, because, as you know, any right cannot be fully respected if there is no justice, and that's why lawyers are the actors to make that right. Therefore, I think that the best way is to give visibility to the role of the lawyers and the judiciary in helping human rights defenders. And definitely the resolution and the special rapporteur and the resolution that we have every year is very important to make it visible that this is an important role and has to be defended. So there will be the human rights defenders, the lawyers should be assimilated in de facto to human rights defenders, because that's what they do when they help them defend their rights and their way to speak.
Thank you, President. Perhaps I'll put this question to you, Ambassador Khan. It seems more fair, and you might be able to respond more substantively, given that you no longer hold the position of presidency. But there's a question relating to the situation in Xinjiang, where there is, of course, prima facie evidence of widespread and systematic violations, possibly amounting to crimes against humanity. The question is, what can and should the Human Rights Council do to respond to the situation in Xinjiang, including potentially through the appointment of an international monitoring and accountability mechanism?
So thank you for the question. And of course, the Human Rights Council and all levels of engagement as well as outputs of the Council depend on state engagement and what states are determined to do, with the important role, of course, of civil society of lobbying those states and hoping to persuade states to take a particular path. So in relation to this particular situation, there are different levels of engagement. The possibility of joint statements, I would say, would be the first step up. Then the possibility, of course, of a discussion in the context of an already scheduled interactive debate or dialogue. And then, of course, the adoption of a decision with several possible mechanisms that could be created by the resolution, if it creates any at all. And I have to say that when Fiji was a member state of the Council, and we are not a member state at present, when we were a member state, we were inclined to feel that if we are going to have a resolution to support, then it's not particularly helpful to deal with a country-specific situation unless there is something that comes out of that resolution. So some form of mechanism which brings the situation back to the Council so that the High Commissioner, for instance, can monitor what is happening in that particular country and report back to the Council. And then the Council decides whether there's a need to step up So from an update to step up to a fact-finding mission or step up to a commission of inquiry. All of this is state-driven. So states must decide what they want, what is palatable, what kind of resolution can be adopted. And when there is an appetite amongst the majority of the states, taking into account the effect on voting patterns by abstentions, then that particular resolution will be passed. And we've seen occurring patterns in situations around the world where originally there wasn't much of an appetite to discuss a particular situation. But the appetite grew, I think, with, well, the role of the media, very important, the role of civil society, very important, but also the political imperatives of the Council and cross-regional support. I think these are some of the important steps that the Council could take. But the result will depend on what the member states want. And this is actually a reality, isn't it, of the Council? Over to you.
Thank you, Ambassador. President, a question for you. It comes from a human rights organization in Africa who is interested in the role that the presidency can play in promoting good faith cooperation with the special procedures by states, and that in particular in the context of country missions. So how can you support special procedures to ensure that states cooperate with them fully and in good faith in the context of all their work, but particularly in the context of country missions?
Thank you for a question, very important also. Definitely for me as a president, I think I have a responsibility of collectively giving visibility and defending and supporting all mechanisms of the Council. So the Council is formed by several mechanisms, and one of the essential mechanisms is the special procedure. So my intention, and I started actually on January to do this, is to treat the special procedures that have been appointed to the Council with the most respect and offer them my full support for their work. And of course, the most effective special procedures and independent actors always will be the ones that are able to go in the field and talk to victims, talk to civil society, engage with the authorities, give visibility to their work in the media and the local media. That's the way that we create another story of what's going on and what it needs to be done. So the dialogue with the state involved, engaged, is very, very important. In the first, and it's public because it's in the Twitter, in the first month, I already had Zooms and in-person meetings with several special procedures and commissions of inquiry of different countries. And that was at the same time that I was engaging with the states concerned. So that's the role of the president, to be able to talk to everybody. And always the purpose is for people to understand that the human rights mechanisms, all of them, are a way to help them solve the situation of human rights. Thank you.
Great, thank you both very much. I think we have time for one more question, which I'll put to both of you. But before I do that, just to note, there's been a number of additional questions that have come through seeking follow-up and elaboration on the role of the Council in prevention, and in particular, or not in particular, including in relationship to the interaction between the Council and the Peacebuilding Commission. There's also a number of questions or comments urging solidarity with and thanking our speakers for raising the issue of LGBTI rights and the importance of equality and dignity for all without discrimination on any grounds. But the closing question comes from another human rights NGO in Africa, and it's this. What can civil society organizations do to help you as president, and past president, you'll also have a view on this, to ensure that the Council is indeed accessible, effective, responsive, and safe? So how can we best help you ensure the Council fulfills its incredibly important mandate?
In Should I start or Ambassador Khan, or whatever you say?
Why don't you start, President?
Okay, thank you. Well, I know perfectly how can you help me in doing this? If you look at one of the 4 actions that I put in my speech when I was elected, is precisely this. How can we rediscover, rethink, and realize the important role of NGOs and civil society in strengthening human rights policies at the national level, and also in creating the progressive development of human rights at large through the Human Rights Council. So the way that I would very much like all civil societies to engage with the presidency is to help me move forward in an important brainstorming, collective brainstorming at the Human Rights Council on the important role of NGOs. Because NGOs have 2 hats, and the 2 hats are as important at the same level, and they have to be acknowledged by states and by the council. One hat is to tell us what is going on, what is wrong, and the accountability before NGOs of the problems and the violations of human rights of countries or non-issues. But there's another important role that some states seems that they haven't discovered yet or fully, which is the role of strengthening human rights policies, working with governments and state in developing human rights policies. So the same NGO, and we have many experiences, the same NGO can be in the morning in the press complaining about a human rights policy that is wrong, or a law that is wrong, but that same NGO could be in the afternoon working with a government official in developing a human rights policy on a recommendation accepted by the UPR, for example. So if we can rebuild trust between states and NGOs as partners, not only people that say what is wrong in the states, that would be a tremendous work, because even the recommendations by the UPR, for example, we can have a collective drive of following recommendations of the UPR and implementing with NGOs as a partner. So I will reach out to all civil society to help me get best practices and good stories on this, working with the states in improving human rights. And one of the 4 brainstorms that I intend to have will be exclusively on this issue. So I will count on your support. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that commitment and invitation, President. We look forward to hearing more and participating. Ambassador Khan, the same question to you.
Thank you very much. And of course, I agree with everything that His Excellency, the President, has just said about the need to engage better and at a more substantive level, not just in Geneva, but also at national level. I agree with everything he said. I think there is a gap in the implementation process. And I think often the conversations we have in Geneva are not necessarily transmitted to partner NGOs on the ground in countries. So I think implementation would be more effective if we followed through. And I think NGOs are absolutely crucial in this regard. Can I say also that the issue of accessibility and safety